The contents of Matt Hancock's leaked WhatsApp messages make him seem like a bit of an idiot. But the way they got leaked is perhaps even more embarrassing for the former health secretary. That's because they were leaked by this woman, Isabel Oakeshott. She's a right-wing journalist and prominent lockdown skeptic who, for some bizarre reason, Matt Hancock employed to co-write this book. It's called The Pandemic Diaries, the inside story of Britain's battle against COVID. Now, to help write the book, Matt Hancock provided Oakeshott with 100,000 WhatsApp messages sent between him and other ministers and officials at the height of the pandemic. Presumably, that was after Oakeshott, had already got the publicity she wanted from this book. Apparently, she didn't collect a writer's fee, which is, potentially she always had ulterior motives along the way. I've got no idea. I don't want to implies she does, but it seems all slightly odd. Isabel Oakeshott, in justifying why she leaked this to the Telegraph, explained she released the WhatsApp messages to avoid a whitewash in the upcoming COVID-19 public inquiry. The book, co-written with Oakeshott, sold fewer than 4,000 copies in its first 2 weeks of release or after its release.
The great irony here is that Hancock is talking about how, this is not an appropriate way to discuss to figure out what happened. This should be the realm of a public inquiry. This should be done in a rigorous and neutral way. It shouldn't be hashed out in a newspaper. But that falls apart when you consider how much resources he's put, albeit not very effectively, towards laundering his own reputation and laundering his own role. And trying to essentially rewrite or at least whitewash what took place while he was health secretary. It begins with this book itself. Why else are you writing a book called The Pandemic Diaries, if not to portray an image of what happened that is favorable towards you? That's not exactly leaving this to a public inquiry and saying, the only appropriate forum for this is kind of an independent investigation. But also, you've been all over the place talking about essentially trying to absolve your own responsibility and talking about how this whole thing operated from your perspective to try and make people like you, to try and make them forget what happened under your governance as health secretary. So you can't really have it both ways. And, I'm not necessarily here going to put all my faith into the integrity of Isabel Oakeshott. I'm not necessarily going to say that her portrayal of how things happened is going to be, particularly rigorous. This is not necessarily a very honest or good faith actor in general. I'm sure she did leave out some context, but also Oakeshott is kind of a menace of Hancock's making, he's playing the same game as her. He's just frustrated that she's on a different team now.
I suppose what's so stupid is she was always kind of on a different team. She was throughout the pandemic a real lockdown skeptic, and that is Matt Hancock's signature policy. So I don't know what he thought he was doing. Not a man with much foresight, although that's not what his book says. So as you say, Dahlia, we're hearing from Matt Hancock and his people now that this is a partial expose. We don't see all the messages, we just see some of the messages. And then they say, also, these messages don't make full sense without seeing all of the other documents. That will all be available to the public inquiry. So wait until the public inquiry. Now, that would be somewhat legitimate if Matt Hancock hadn't gone on I'm a Celebrity to try and launder his reputation, hadn't now started a TV company because he's so keen to constantly be speaking to the public about how actually he did the right thing during the pandemic. And especially if he hadn't wrote this goddamn book, which seems to all be about making him seem like he always did the right thing. Now, I have to admit, I haven't read this book. I don't have any plans to. Someone who has, though, is Rachel Cunliffe at The New Statesman. This is the headline. This was her review. So before this leak, this was her review of the book after reading it. Matt Hancock's Pandemic Diaries are a delusional piece of self-aggrandizing fan fiction. And she says, in these retrospectively constructed entries, Hancock casts himself as the hero of both the COVID crisis and his love life. It's pathetic. And as I say, I hadn't read this book, so I was surprised to hear about this point about entries being retrospectively constructed. And this is important because his pandemic diaries are actually all written after the event, but with entries showing the date and then written in the present tense. So it includes Wednesday, the 1st of January, woke up in Suffolk after a quiet New Year's Eve. right? But that wasn't written on the 1st of January. That was written a few years later, probably by Isabel Oakeshott, pretending to be Matt Hancock, waking up on New Year's Eve. It's all very strange, all very Matt Hancock, actually. On the rewriting of history as well, this is the politically significant bit. Cunliffe writes this. Are we really to believe, for example, that our omniscient protagonist spotted that a mystery pneumonia outbreak in China would be a key public health priority on New Year's Day 2020? Should we take his word that he started thinking about a vaccine 5 days later? The sustained use of the historical present tense is a trick to mask just how subjective and unreliable the narrator is. So are the tangential asides that try to make the diaries feel more like an authentic depiction of everyday life in all its randomness. So here she includes one of the diary entries. I cannot believe that Andrew Wakefield, the anti-vaxxer, is still in circulation spreading his misinformation, or that he used to date the supermodel Elle Macpherson. How did that happen? So again, this is Isabel Oakeshott going back and pretending to be Matt Hancock and making light-hearted comments about what was going on at the time. And then Cunliffe goes on to say this. In context, the headline-generating revelation that Boris Johnson said the virus would probably go away when initially warned reads like just another attempt by Hancock to show off his superhuman foresight. Now, of course, if you ever needed evidence, if it wasn't obvious to you already that Matt Hancock doesn't possess superhuman foresight, writing this book, The Pandemic Diaries, with the help of someone who hated his signature policy and then handing her a cache of all his downloaded WhatsApps, well, it hardly makes him seem like a clairvoyant.